roughly 82% of organic sales happen in the buy box. Why it's so important. At any given second, there's an optimal price to be well positioned to receive that purchase. I really dislike Grant Cardone's stuff. Like the 10x rule. You know what that whole book says? You take your goals and you times it by 10. That's the entire book. That's a tweet, barely.
How easy is it to get onboarded with GoAura to switch over from anyone else?
So it takes less than 10 minutes to get up and running. And we're about to streamline that even better. Our onboarding is about to get, no matter what that thing is, there's at least one person on the internet who has obsessed about that for the last half to a full decade and just is dying to tell you about it.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome back to the Doughboys podcast. I'm your host, Logan, joined by my lovely, studly co-hosts, Flippin' It with Cisco and Joshua McGill. Today, we are also joined by special guest, Dillon from GoAura. Dillon has years of experience in the Amazon industry, from being a seller himself, educating people in the space through putting out content, and also being a software provider. So we're super excited to bring him on, talk about his vast experience. And yeah, Dillon, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
So Dillon, what got you into the Amazon industry originally?
Yeah, great question. So a specific podcast on smart passive income with Pat Flynn. This is like literally a decade ago. I think they're still around. They're known as the Selling Family. They did a bunch of RA, right? So at the time, I took a few years off between high school and college to figure out kind of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be in business, just didn't know in what way. And so eventually found myself being, I got really into fitness, got certified as a national personal trainer, did that full time. And I always wanted something that could scale. That was always my thing. Even today, I'm like, does it scale? And, scaling your time's not really an option, right? Yeah, you can work more or you can charge more for your time. And a lot of people are okay with charging more for their time. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I'm building deep relationships with people that I'm helping hit goals. And I kind of found a niche where I was helping anywhere from middle school to high school kids that were struggling with self-esteem and weight issues and helping them, one, understand their body better, like mechanics, and really build their confidence in themselves. And like, it felt weird to be like, oh, I'd like to make more money. So I have to charge you more for this thing and really charge your parents more. And so, I kind of knew that wasn't a forever thing. It was enjoyable while it lasted. I just haven't listened to that episode. And like most people went through a traditional path of, first and foremost, you hear about it. You're like, oh, that's interesting. There's no way that's real. And then you go and you buy something at Walmart and you sell it and you made money and you're like, okay, it is real. Now I need to decide what I want to do with that. And for me, I was like, you know what, this is cool. I want to do this. And so eventually left the gym and just went ham at RA. I spent like, 10, 12 hours a day at Targets, Tuesday mornings, Walmarts, all that good stuff. And at the time I was like, I really want to go back to school. I had realized, I went through this whole thing where when I was younger in about elementary school, third grade, I was labeled with a few different learning disabilities. So dyslexia, short-term memory deficit, ADHD, essentially, or ADD, depending on how you want to look at it. And so growing up, I was basically told I was dumb, is what it boiled down to. And that's why I didn't go to college, because like, oh, I'm not smart enough to do that. That was never like on the table for me. But then I started to find business books and got really into reading. And I remember having conversations with people and then being like, dude, you're pretty smart. I was like, really? I don't think so. But then I was like, okay, maybe I am. Maybe just nobody taught me how to learn. Maybe that's the thing. And so I, got a bunch of books on learning how to learn, which is so meta, but nobody teaches you how to do that, right? And so I did that. I was like, screw it, I'm going back to college full time. So I went back to school as a finance major. Thought I was going to go into investment banking or private equity. And then Amazon started to take off a little bit. RA was a grind. I didn't have the time because I was going back to school and I was going in person. Like I really wanted to be in the class with professors, building relationships, really diving into this stuff because I cared. And then pivoted because like, RA doesn't really work for time. Let me go OA. Was horrible at online arbitrage. Not great at it. Couldn't tell you why. Just couldn't figure it out. I was like, all right, well then the other options are private label or wholesale. Private label is really good if you have cash flow already and you want to build a brand, you want to exit it. I don't think it's good for people that are like, I need to pay my bills. Wholesale, on the other hand, is good. It's very cash flow positive, relatively fast if you know what you're doing. And so I went wholesale. I stopped sourcing RA. I spent all my time learning wholesale. At the time, there was only one course. And it was pretty pricey. So I just taught myself. I just really broke it down. I was like, first principles, what even is this? What are we even doing? And then that started to click, which was awesome. So that started to take off. And then I met my now co-founder, James, who happened to be a wholesale seller as well. He was actually a computer science major full-time at UMass in Massachusetts. So we're like, man, we have these independent processes that we've created for ourselves, and they're kind of the same, but we're really hacking things together using Trello, Google Sheets. Basically, what we were doing was building an order management system and a CRM system for our suppliers and everything. And he's like, dude, why don't we just build software? He's like, I've already been working on this. Like, let's just partner up. And that's what we did. So we launched VinDrive CRM, yeah, gosh, probably 8-ish years ago. And so launched that, failed miserably. I say miserably. We learned a ton. Right. First thing going into software, I have no idea what the heck we're doing. None of it. But that's good because we learned a lot. We learned we could build an audience, we could educate, we could teach. And we also learned that we had a passion for building software products. It was really fun and enjoyable. So we paused and said, okay, well, this is never really going to pay any one of our bills. So why don't we really think about what we could build that had a larger impact? Like, what would we want to build if we were sellers? And we got into repricing. We're like, every tool we've used just has not met the mark in our opinion. And we think we could build a better version of that. And so that's what we did. And that's when we launched Aura in 2018 between semesters, like on winter break. I flew to Amherst in Massachusetts. We launched, I flew back, went to class on Monday. And yeah, we've just been growing ever since.
Awesome. Yeah. I love, you said you first started out going in to retail arbitrage and you go through that traditional path that everyone goes through. And I feel like, yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's kind of like skeptical at first. Like, is this
Yeah.
actually going to work? I'm curious, how long did you do the arbitrage business before you transitioned to wholesale?
Probably a few months. I
Okay.
don't remember exactly, but somewhere between 3 and 6 months.
Okay.
Because once I started to spend all my free time doing that, and I could see that it was an option, but that I would have to grind it out, that's when things at the gym, again, I'm a scaling guy, right? I'm a systems guy. So I found a process to essentially book free sessions, like intro sessions. The way you do sales and personal training is you either walk the floor and you just have conversations and you sell people. I sucked at that. That's not my personality type. I'm not very outgoing. Um, and so I found a way to basically, we had tons of people that would join every day. And then I would go back and be like, hey, everybody gets a free session with a trainer. And so I would just book, 5 people a day. And then we would do that. I would run through my whole sales process, do objection handling, all that good stuff. And it was a good process. Like I really got that down. It was starting to do well. And then the GM was like, hey, I want everybody to do that. It's like, well, the volume of which we're adding users or adding customers to the gym doesn't support 5 full-time personal trainers tapping that. It's really only 1. And so we kind of had an argument. And I was like, listen, if this is how I'm making money, like I only got paid if I was training people. And so, I was like, I don't think this makes a lot of sense. It's not really being thought through. I'm probably just going to move on. So yeah, probably 3 or 6 months, somewhere around there.
Cool. So yeah, let's talk about, then the transition from being a seller to actually starting to provide services for sellers too. You
Yeah.
said you started off with VinDrive, the CRM, and then started to build the repricing tool. So if I'm, brand new to Amazon or maybe just early on, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. What is repricing? Why is it so important?
Yeah, great question. So roughly 82% of organic sales happen in the buy box. That's why it's so important. At any given second, there's an optimal price to be well positioned to receive that purchase. So when you're getting started, it's less of a problem because you don't need to be super optimized. But very quickly, when you get to dozens upon dozens of SKUs and you're doing this relatively consistently, you realize that you're missing out. Every moment you're not in the buy box or not well positioned, you are losing on sales. So simplistically, what repricing does is we run algorithms. They're called strategies. 24/7, we integrate with your seller account, and we're running these algorithms 24/7 to make sure we're doing one of 2 things: either increasing revenue by having you well positioned in the buy box at any given moment, and or protecting profit margin by making sure that we're not pushing the price down too much and suppressing it. So simplistically, what we're doing is we're increasing sales, right? Just the way we're doing that fits within the algorithm that Amazon deems competitive, if that makes sense. So it becomes important because as you start to scale, when you go from having 5 and 10 SKUs to 100 plus SKUs, even 50 SKUs, it is physically impossible for a human being to sit there and optimize. Even if you wanted to be in there and go match buy box, match buy box, match buy box, you can do that all day. But like the moment you get to the end, you got to start over and you're already behind, right? And so instead, we use code to be able to do that as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
100%.
definitely.
100%. And then, so I guess, all right, so I wasn't in the resale space 8 years ago when, you essentially first started to build this business. What other like competitors did you have in the space? Because from one thing that I've learned in studying business is one of the most important things is being first to market. And I'm going to assume you guys weren't. And so what kind of challenges did you guys
Yeah.
face going from there and kind of differentiating yourselves from any other competitor?
Yeah, great question. So, the first to market thing, I think it depends. There are situations and industries where being first to market does make a ton of sense. I think in general business, it does not actually provide a ton of value. If you look at the first repricing tool, no, like they're gone, right? Because for the simple reason, especially in software, things change rapidly, right? What is possible via code today versus last year is vastly different. Even just looking at large language models, right? Like that just opens up a plethora of things. So being first in software can be beneficial if you're really opening up a brand new market and something that's never been done. But if you look at most software companies, especially as a market, the first mover is actually not the one that crushes it. It's really the one who comes in and says, great, you proved the demand. What did you do wrong? Let me go do it differently. And so for us, there were plenty of repricing tools. It's funny when people are like, who's your competition? I'm like, man, that's a hard question to answer because it's less about how many repricing tools are there and really which ones actually compete, right? Like you can have a repricing tool that has 50 customers, they do a terrible job, and it really doesn't do much. Are you really a competitor of ours? Not really. So it's kind of like, I say for Amazon sellers, where they're like, oh, there's so much competition in Amazon. No, there's not. There's a lot of sellers. There's not a lot of competition because most people don't treat it seriously as you should, and they don't operate as seriously as they should. So yeah, they sell things. It doesn't mean they're a competitor. So man, even back then and over the years, there's probably a new repricing tool every 3 months. But what's so crazy is they just don't last because here's what happened. There's an interesting pattern in the Amazon software space. One of two things tend to happen. You have an Amazon seller who does well, right? They did well in business. This was their first business. They got some cash and like, you know what? Margins are tight. But you know what margins are not tight in? Software. And most of the time, software companies, if you get it large enough and it's growing fast enough, you can exit it for at least 4x revenue, not EBITDA, revenue. It's a recurring model. And so they will say, great, I'm going to go do that. They're not technical. They don't understand anything about code. And so they'll go and hire a bunch of programmers. And we don't hire programmers, we hire engineers. They go hire a bunch of, $6 and $8 per hour software developers overseas, and they go build this. And so they build explicitly what you ask them to build and nothing else. And you end up having subpar software. And that becomes a problem because the founder, the person who's in charge, doesn't understand enough about code to create systems that can scale and that operate efficiently. And so those companies tend to really struggle because the cost of running that operation is way too high, or there's so many bugs, people hate it. They don't even understand good design, and we can talk about that. Or the inverse happens. You have somebody who is technical who comes in, they can build amazing software, but they don't really understand the nuances of being a seller, right? It's not just here's the problem, go solve it. No, there's so many little nuances you got to understand. We stood out and took off so well, I think, so fast because we had both. James and I had both been Amazon sellers for a number of years before we got into this, and James is also a legitimate computer science major, so nothing's been outsourced. And so what's interesting is data is not the problem in the Amazon software space. It's good product. And I say product, people go, what do you mean in software? No, software is product. Product is a combination of amazing features, but also looking at UI, UX. UI being user interface. How does it look? UX being user experience. How do you do certain things, right? How do you, when you say go do this task, is that task itself optimized? And so for us, we did a survey, and it was just open field, not a word bank or anything. We just asked all of our users, what word comes to mind when you think about Aura? And the term intuitive kept coming up. We're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. because it's not just about updating your price that makes a repricing tool important. There's so much more to it. There's the team behind it. Can you be supported, right? We don't outsource anything. We've never outsourced customer success or support. And most of the time that goes to the Philippines for $4 an hour. No, we have Finn and we're hiring another person next week, most likely. Knowing that you could go to the company and say, hey, I'm confused or I'm struggling or I'm overwhelmed or like this doesn't make sense, and get an actual answer and have it fixed. If it's just like, oh, I didn't understand this one setting and we just do it for you, that's totally different. But also just having amazing product. I mean, dude, software, listen, the best practices in tech, just the baseline is enough to do amazing work in Amazon software because it is tech. But for whatever reason, it does not follow tech best practices. It doesn't. It's so insane. I mean, we've had competitors, head of customer success at a competitor, applied to be one of our CSMs, and they had 4 people managing 400 users, 4 full-time people managing 400 users. We could have one person manage thousands, and that's just one area of the business. So just in terms of how you're building operations is so important. You know, for us, we really paused on product for a number of years to really think through what's the next 5 to 10 years. And like, can our current architecture, the current platform support that and allow us to do all the awesome stuff we want to do? No. So we actually spent the last 18 plus months rebuilding it from the ground up. Every single line of code has been completely rewritten. We actually wrote it in a different language even. So in terms of like, who's our competitor? There's a few that we actively compete with, but funny enough, out of the probably 20 plus that there are, it's really only 2 or 3 that we actually consider competitors actively.
So Dylan, you mentioned, there was another company, just thinking about the ratio of customers, support agents to number of people that they're able to support. Why do you think the difference there was so large? I could think it's either they're just really bad at managing their customer service, or maybe either their product sucks, there's always problems, or they do a poor job of educating their customers on how to use it. What do you think kind of causes that?
So it's a number of things. It could very well be all the above, right? If your product's amazing, then you're going to have less of that problem. You're probably going to have more users anyways. People's reference point is very interesting because the guy I was talking to was like, oh, we do so well. We do so well in customer success and customer support. I'm like, all right, walk me through that, right? But his reference point was completely wrong. I was like, actually, that's horrible. What we do is we set ridiculous expectations to then reverse engineer. Well, how do you do it? Right? When we got started, I had a theory that one person full-time could manage and support 2,000 to 2,500 users. That was my theory. I remember we had an advisor who was like, no, not possible. Can't do it. I was like, well, how do you know? Have you ever tried to solve the problem? Have you ever attempted that? Well, no, but that just doesn't make sense. Okay, let's use first principles. Why doesn't it make sense? Let's go prove it right or wrong. And so when you can have a clear picture in mind of what you're attempting to achieve, no matter how ridiculous it is, you can then go and try to find that answer. And so what's funny is even with that simplistic thing, we're deciding at the time, what software do we use? Is it Zendesk, these other things, right? And like, who knows? But then we happened to find a company called Intercom, which I'm now obsessed with. And we've been with them since day 0 because they had a theory. They had their framework for how support should be, and it was in alignment with ours, which was it should be scalable, but it should be hyper personalized too. Okay, now that's a different story. And so what we're able to do is find a resource to better understand, okay, our theory is correct, and here's how you go about doing that. And so now we don't have to go recreate the wheel from ground zero with no knowledge. We can say, you've already done the hard work. And it's a good example, right? Like when I hear gurus be like, oh, here's how you should reprice. And I'll get into arguments. I'm like, hey, like, I hear what you're saying. What's your sample size? You and maybe a few students. Ours is tens of thousands. So like when we got started with repricing, we started to educate heavily because I'm like, dude, no repricing tool is out here educating. And you have the best data. You have the knowledge to say this works.
You have all the data,
even if it's counterintuitive, all the data, right? And so when you find a company who does amazing product, Intercom's an amazing product, and they're heavy on education because they're like, we want to understand how to do this even better. What's the best way to do this? And then they teach it. So what's so funny is we wanted to have world-class customer support. It's not because we've done it before. The first version, when we were just hacking it together with VinDrive CRM, was horrible. I had no idea what I was doing, just sending emails back and forth. But now all of a sudden we have this process in place that we're able to build on top of, and we're able to do it from a world-class perspective. A lot of people don't set that level of a goal. It's so interesting. Even to the, like, take anything. I really dislike Grant Cardone's stuff. Like, let's take the 10x rule. You know what that whole book says? You take your goals and you times it by 10. That's the entire book. That's a tweet, barely. But there is some validity to that concept, right? Like, what are you attempting to achieve here? We're very impact driven. Like, we chase curiosity. We try to do things that we're just like, people tell us it's impossible. I don't know. Maybe it's not, though. Let's go find out. That's the fun part of it. And so I think just in the Amazon space, which is true for product, which is true for operations, which is true for marketing, which is true for customer support, it is 9 times out of 10 very much duct taped together and just said, it's not like the founder jumped in and was like, let me really figure this out, understand that, hold high expectations, what are good KPIs, blah, blah, blah. They just go do it. Outsource it. I'm better than that, right? It's not worth my time. The first 2 years of us launching Aura, I did support full time as one of the founders. We had an advisor be like, that's the worst use of your time. It was the best use of my time. Direct feedback with customers. I got to understand where their problems were, what language they used, and where they needed education. That told me all I needed to know. You, unfortunately, again, have owners or founders that don't think these things are as important, and then they just outsource it. But like, for us, measure what matters, right? Like John Doerr. For us, we have 2 KPIs for customer support. First one is speed. Median first response time has to be less than 10 minutes during business hours. We tend to hit 5 to 7 minutes. The second one is quality. If you got speed, you better have quality, because you can hack speed all day long. Quality is CSAT, so customer satisfaction, has to be over 95%. We tend to hit 98% on average. We check that every Monday.
How do you measure CSAT?
CSAT. So every time you interact with our support team, when we close the ticket, you just get a little survey that says, like, basically, how was it? Was it good? Was it horrible? And then you give us feedback. So we know basically the percentage that were in a certain range, which was like good to excellent. And then we basically take that. If we need to go deeper, we have like the customer can say, like, oh, I didn't like this. Like, you were mean to me here. We can dive deeper into that. So now all of a sudden we have standards. And now that we're crushing that, my question to myself is, why can't it be better? Why, if we're setting at 10 minutes and I think that's crazy and we're hitting 5 to 7 minutes, why can't it be 2 minutes?
Well,
Maybe
how
that's
many
not possible
phone
anymore.
calls are you getting?
So this is why this is important. We don't do phone calls. We do live chat. Now, you can also email in to us. It's still live chat because it's intercom. So we intentionally did not do phone support. We've had people be like, you need to have phone support. No. Why? It doesn't scale. Because I can actually help you faster by multi-threading, because now I can have 10 personalized conversations in real time. So we can scale ourselves. So now we don't need 5 people. We need 1. Now, there are cases where users are really struggling and they're like, they just need to be in a Zoom call. We will do that. Absolutely. So we have times where we're like, hey, let's schedule a Zoom call. We'll do a one-on-one onboarding. We'll do that all day long. Like I had 2 today where they're just like, I just really need to wrap my head around stuff and I just need to talk to you. Great, we'll do that. But we try not to do that. So we automatically handle and successfully complete 60 to 80% of our inbound support tickets without ever seeing them, which means we reserve our 20% for the people who really need that hand holding.
But those first like live chats, those are all human responses. There's no bots responding like at first.
So there is a bot within reason. So if the bot has a direct answer, like if you're like, hey, what's pricing? You're going to get a bot answer, right? Because a human doesn't really need to spend their time to be like, it's this, right? Like, it's just such a repetitive thing. It's really the things where there is no clear answer, where a human has to go in, deconstruct, look at your strategy, the price change, what happened, to be able to say, here's exactly what happened. Is that good or bad? But for basic Q&A stuff, that gets handled automatically.
So I have a kind of a random question. Do you like Apple?
I'm a fanboy.
So the reason why I asked is because
I have 4 things right here in my field of view right now. 5. I have 5. I take it back.
The reason I ask is because a lot of what you have been saying, I find a lot of comparison to Apple and the company and how they kind of built out their whole systems, right? So a couple of things that you touched based on was exploration, right? You also touched base on pushing the expectation, user interface, which is such a big thing. And then where it really kicked off to me that you're an Apple fan is it doesn't really matter being first to market, because Apple's never
Yeah.
first to market, but they just dominated after the
Right.
fact. So how much
Right.
does that play, or how much does the user interface play in how you decide to make code and how you decide to move forward
Mhm.
with all of your decisions? Because I mean, Logan and I were
Yeah.
talking about it before you got on the chat. Your user
Mhm.
interface is amazing. It's the best one compared to
Thank
any
you.
other
Thank you.
repricer that we've seen. It's one, it's
Yeah.
easy, and two, it's super cool.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's all kudos to Tasso on our team. So we're probably one of the few software companies, tech companies in the Amazon space that actually has a product designer full time in house. Like that's all he does. And so, in terms of how important is that, it's everything. You really haven't earned the right to write code until you know what that code is meant to be. Like, yeah, the back end functionality of this is going to happen here. Like, sure, you can kind of plan for that. But here's what we did, right? So when we started working on New Aura, it took so long, but it's because we actually went through the details of it. Funny enough, before we wrote any code, we created prototypes. So in design, you typically use a tool called Figma, so everybody can be in there working on the design. And then what's funny is you can create these fake interactions, right? So you can be like, click here, and it acts like you're clicking a button, but really it's just an image. And so we create these designs, and then we would sit down with users and we would send them the file and like, hey, go do this task. And if they failed, we go, okay, that's on us. Why did you fail? And we'd notice the pattern. So what you're seeing is actually 5 to 7 iterations later. So funny enough, the specific listing SKU page took roughly 2 to 3 weeks of back and forth with users to even get to a decent spot where we're like, cool, we would feel comfortable shipping with this, and we still have some ideas of changes we want to make. So before we even started writing code, now I take this back because the back end architecture that can kind of do its own thing because we already knew the changes we wanted to make there, and that made more sense. But just in terms of the front end and stuff like that, I mean, you here's what drives me insane about software, right? And this goes back to my comment about great product. Um, you just get dumped all the data. They're like, oh, you want more data? All there. Okay, so I kind of geek out with like biohacking, with cognition, stuff like that, right? Because I had the whole like learning disability thing, and then I was like, let me really dive into this and understand how do people learn, how do neurons work, all this good stuff. And turns out, if you give people a ton of data on one page without clear hierarchy, you can use color. We use color. People will be just overwhelmed because the brain doesn't know what to focus on. There's no clear pull that says this is important over everything else. Doesn't occur. So good design does that. So funny enough, we actually put in probably 120 to 150% of the data on the SKU page. We put more of that than what was in old Aura, legacy Aura is what we're calling it now. So you have way more data, but it doesn't feel overwhelming. It actually, in my opinion, feels less overwhelming because we designed that entire page for a flow. So we created different layers of information. There's information that you need to look at, but not always, only when you need it. So let's make it one click away. Now, when you land above the fold, so when you land on a page before scrolling, that's called above the fold. That's the most important real estate because the user has to do nothing to see it. We made it so that you could see what's important. How are my sales? Am I in the buy box or not? What's my current price? What's the product I'm looking at? And what are my settings? Right there. Now, if you need to go deeper, you can scroll and we give you more information, but we give it to you in an organized way that is really streamlined. And that took thought. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is you have software companies where you get great engineers or computer programmers, and they're not designers. It's a different world. Even a front end engineer is not a designer. They can absolutely sit down and follow best practices and probably do pretty well, but most of the time that's not what's being done. And so you end up with this overwhelming thing to look at, and you're like, I don't know what the heck I'm supposed to be doing. The product should tell you what you're supposed to be doing. You should land on any page and know exactly what you should be doing because the product should be slightly opinionated. And so for us, we take a lot of inspiration from Apple for sure. I mean, think about what they're doing. Like, complexity is easy, simplicity is difficult. There's product quotes of that. There's conceptual quotes of that from like Einstein. There's also writing quotes. I think it was Hemingway was like, wrote this whole long letter, was like at the very end said, sorry, I didn't have a whole lot of time to write a shorter letter. Simple is difficult, but that's when you start to give users leverage. This is the big thing for us, technical leverage. How do you give the user make the user have to do less but give them more output? They put in 0.5, they get in 5 out. That's leverage. That's why we like things like automation. That's why we like things like code, right? You write the code one time and it can happen a million times and you only wrote it once. That's leverage. And so for us, the whole thing is, how do we design products that give sellers leverage? And part of that is the interface.
Yeah, and getting that leverage really ties back to what repricing is really trying to accomplish in the first place. You know, you were giving that example if
Yeah.
you could go through and try to manually update everything, but you're never going to be able to keep up. So being able to leverage tools like or Repricer is what's going to,
Yeah.
help out tremendously. I want to backtrack a little bit to, talking about your competitors or just other options
Yeah.
that are out there for people. Why should people choose Aura? And when should they choose Aura? If you have different tiers now too. So when should
Yeah.
they use your first option versus your high tier?
Yeah, it's a great question. The essential tier is priced at $97. That's designed to be affordable enough to give you still very advanced features. Because here's what happens, right? Like, you have this whole concept of instant repricing. Everybody's got it, but some cases you can pay not a lot of money and only get repriced once every 15 minutes, meaning you're literally being penalized because you're not paying enough. In my opinion, if you're getting anything less than instant repricing, you're not saving money, you're actually losing money in terms of opportunity cost. Right? Like, that 15 minutes, I could have repriced you in, honestly, a few hundred times. And that could have been the difference between you having 10% additional buy box and therefore 10% potential additional sales. Like, that's a meaningful amount. So $100 is like a good entry point. In terms of when you do it, it's really once you've figured out, like, cool, I know how to source things. And like, I've got a business. Like, if you're if you're getting started, you have like 5 SKUs and you're not even sure if you're gonna make money on them, wait. Not a good time. What I tend to recommend is, we have a 14-day ungated trial, meaning ungated as in we don't ask for a credit card. We don't require that. So my whole thing is, I don't like selling people on Aura. I think people should try it and see if it makes sense for them. Right? We're not going to be for everybody. I really believe most software is not for everyone. But if you think, okay, you know what, I'm doing about 5 grand a month in sales, kind of, I'm really understanding sourcing. I got a good flow here. Let me go jump into Aura because it's going to cost me $100, but I got 2 weeks. Did it make you more than $100? If it did, great, you're good to go, right? Because now everything moving forward is going to be positive ROI. In terms of the difference between Essential and the Pro tier, because there's a big jump there in price. Pro is really designed for sellers actively scaling. It's hard to say, like, at this revenue it makes sense. Because I've used software in one of 2 ways. Either one, you already have that problem and you need to solve it so you can go and get the software, or 2, you know where you're going and you need the software to get there. A good example of this is like a CRM tool, right? You don't wait until you have a ton of contacts or leads to go get a CRM tool. No, you kind of need it before you start to add people to it. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose. That's the whole point of it. So repricing is kind of that way. So when I talk to sellers and they're like, hey, I'm trying to figure out, does Pro make sense for me or not? I tend to say, okay, what's your revenue right now? What's your goal in the next 2 to 3 months? And if they're like, revenue's pretty good, we're going to kind of keep going business as usual. If the revenue's kind of lower, I might say, hey, it's probably not a good idea. But if I hear people say, you know what, we're really pushing, I just hired 2 people, I just added a ton of capital, and like, I'm really trying to hit like this crazy number in the next 2 to 3 months, you should probably move to Pro. Because Pro is going to include Maven, which is our new AI model. It's not a strategy, it's a model. We can get into the nitty gritty details of that because there's a big difference there. And that really is where you start to get that ultimate leverage, right? Where you're setting one setting in the model and the model is handling far more complexity for you. It's the difference between using, let's say, 3 to 5 rule-based strategies and you having to go in and decide, okay, this listing needs this one, this other listing, I'm going to switch over here because like that makes more sense, to you just having one model where you apply it and say, great, you got that, I'm out. Let me go source more inventory. It's like a long-winded answer. There's no easy answer, unfortunately.
How'd you come up with the name Maven? It's a very unique
We
name.
used AI. Funny enough, we used
No,
AI.
all right.
Yeah, so I use ChatGPT. So funny enough,
Nice.
we see a world where we have a few different models. I don't think you need 15 machine AI. Like, you don't need that. You need a few models that are fine-tuned for specific outcomes. We wanted a balanced model. And by balance, I mean, we're finding the balance between sales velocity and profitability. And that value, by the way, it's an actual value. We call it the optimal price. So the whole model is fine-tuned to get you there. And then it will run its own testing and all this stuff to figure out, okay, well, what is true? What's the behaviors? What do I need to do based on what's happening to get us there? And ideally, not only us, but the buy box itself. So this whole balance concept was interesting. So jumped into GPT-4 and just had a conversation with it, where I was like, hey, here's what we do. Here's what we're working on. The model's very balanced. We like spacey stuff. We like kind of high-tech stuff. Give me, 20, 25 different names that really elicit this kind of balanced feeling and tell me why. And after 2 or 3 iterations, Maven came up. I was like, you know what? Maven's kind of cool because it doesn't sound aggressive. Like Archer might be kind of aggressive potentially, right, as a name, but it's not so conservative that it sounds like it's not doing anything. Maven's just like, I don't know, it just feels good. And so I floated, probably 5 or 10 of these names to the team, and everybody was like, Maven sounds pretty cool. I was like, all right, cool, we'll use Maven. So funny enough, we used AI to help name our model.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Maven sounds like Gandalf's cousin to me. That's what I
Right?
think of when I think
Right.
of Maven. I think of like a wise
Exactly.
old man.
That's what I'm saying. AI coming
So-
in clutch for us.
There you go. So let's say you have someone who wants to jump to GoAura, but they've been using another repricer
Mhm.
for the last couple of years, whether it's Be Cool or Seller Snap or whatever other repricer that they have.
Yeah.
How easy is it to get onboarded with GoAura to switch over from
Yeah.
anyone else over to you guys?
So it takes less than 10 minutes to get up and running. And we're about to streamline that even better. Our onboarding is about to get dramatically cleaner, in my opinion. All you have to do is connect your marketplace. So we start to import everything. If you happen to use Inventory Lab, we have that integration. So you click add and there's your costs. And then you need to create a strategy. The strategy is where most people tend to get more confused because repricing at this company is not necessarily the same at this company, even though they can both be rule-based. They're still different functionalities. And so what I tend to say is if you already know and you feel confident of like, what you want and you can go through settings and do it yourself, less than 10 minutes. You can be like, literally you created the account to like you have a price change occurring, less than 10 minutes. For other people that are less versed on the strategy side and need a little bit more time, I would say you could still get up and running, but I would reach out to our team and say, hey, I'm new, I'm transferring from here. Here's what I want in terms of my strategies to do. And we will say, great, we'll go do it for you. Give us 10 to 15 minutes, give us some time, and we'll just go build it for you. So we're happy to do work for users. We get everybody's busy and a lot of people work full time. So just in terms of like, how difficult is it to switch? I mean, it's not. Listen, if you can source profitable inventory, you'll be fine.
Cool. So I know you said it's kind of hard to give a revenue number for when someone should upgrade to that pro, but I'm curious if you might have any data or just experience, talking to sellers. Is there a certain revenue range that you typically see that people start to make that jump?
Yeah, so pro is a relatively new thing, so we're still learning a lot.
Okay.
I think from what I have been seeing, 50 grand in the last 30 days in sales is when you need to start having a discussion, like seriously, of like the added features will, without a doubt, lead to better performance. It just comes down to, does that price point make sense for you? Because some people are, I was talking to a group of sellers today, and they're profit first, like fanatics, like really hard on it, and they're like, oh, it's like $100 outside of the range. I'm like, okay, listen, if you want to be a purist about it, like, I guess wait another 30 days, but 50 grand a month, that's when you start to really say, okay, well, the ROI, because here's the thing.
Yeah.
You have different types of tools. You have efficiency-based tools and effectiveness-based tools. If you look at tools like Jungle Scout, awesome tool, great team. If you suck at sourcing and you go use Jungle Scout, Helium 10, whatever, it's going to make you more efficient at sourcing. But if you suck at sourcing, you're just efficiently still bad, right? Like it doesn't make you a better sourcer, right? So that's the efficiency side. You have to get good at the effectiveness yourself, and then you add on tools to make you faster. Effectiveness tools, they're far and few in between, but repricing is one of those. Like there's a clear ROI. And so what's nice is I try to get people to understand it's less about the cost of it and what is the ROI. Because if $500 is the difference between like basically if you do that and you made $700 just in additional profit, that's positive ROI. You're good, right? You weren't going to get that to begin with, so there you go, right? So the same kind of concept I have of when you go from not repricing to repricing with that $100 tier. It's the same concept. What's the ROI here? So for some people, it can be 30 grand a month. For other people, it might be 100 grand a month. I've always said that repricing is a amplification of good inventory, right? If you got terrible inventory and your buy box is basically at your cost, I don't care what company you're going to, it's not going to work out, right? But if you got good inventory, good enough inventory, those added features really start to add up. So I would say, yeah, like simplistically, if you're around 50 grand a month, you should really consider that, because I think you get to a point where you're losing out on opportunity. And by opportunity cost, I mean the sales you could have gotten that you're now not going to get because you're not utilizing certain features. That starts to matter.
Yeah, that's really important. Seller Snap has been the repricer that's
Yeah.
kind of at the $500 price point. And people talk to me about it all the time. And I'm sure now I'm going to be talking to people about Aura, since you guys have a similar price point out there. But they're like, how do I justify that jump? And it's exactly what you just explained. It's the opportunity cost. And yeah, so speaking of Seller Snap, everyone's wondering it. You guys are now at a similar price range. So how does the new Aura version compare to Seller Snap?
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, there's a lot of companies that I think do a disservice to their customers. Seller Snap, they're a cool team. We actually hung out with them in Seattle. They're like really cool. So that's kind of fun. It's just how do you justify it, or what's the difference? You can't run A/B testing. It's not possible. Not a good A/B test. For us, I think the approach that we're taking it is just such a different perspective, right? Because we're realizing. Let me put it to you this way, actually. If you asked me what was my go-to strategy, my recommended strategy a year ago, I had a pretty good answer, and it worked 80% of the time. We call it the oscillation strategy. When you ask me that today, I don't have an answer, because actually the reality of it is every single one of your SKUs should have a optimized strategy for it, and it should change hour by hour. The strategy itself should change. Good luck. Now, game theory is awesome. Like, actually, we operate in that same modality because it makes a ton of sense. Like, we're competing in a game, right? That's a straightforward model. But I think where things start to change is you have to do two important things. You need better memory to basically be able to reference the past. That's important. And two, you need to be able to run its own testing. This is where the intelligence part starts to come into play. So what happens when we calculate your the optimal price, the price where actually you're maximizing your profit and not losing sales velocity? That changes in some cases minute by minute, some cases day by day, depends. And then you can study each competitor and understand, for you, I need to reprice 5 cents below to win the buy box from you. But for Cisco, I can match, and he's going to match me. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So now, depending on the actual attributes of the listing and each competitor, I can now tailor my behavior to get not only myself, but the buy box as well, and ideally you guys, up to the optimal price with me. So every model should be fine-tuned. And so if the problem is every listing should have its own strategy, the solution is you have a model that designs the strategy. This is layers of abstraction, right? This is where you get kind of geeky on like tech stuff, right? If you need infinite possible permutations of robots, do you build each one, or do you build a robot that they then can build the robots, right? That's that whole concept. And so what's nice is as things are changing in real time, so is the model. So the model will actually self-optimize, will self-adapt. So what's nice is going from Q3 to Q4, or even right before Prime Day to Prime Day, with Maven, you don't have to change anything. It's going to do its own changing because it understands, oh, cool, the BSR just got cut in half, demand's high. Optimal price probably should be a little bit higher. Let's fluctuate with that. What's our competition doing versus what they're not doing? And let's play in that world. So what's nice is you go from a rule-based strategy, or even in some cases, some competitors have machine learning AI-based strategies, and you still got to set like 10 to 15 parameters, right? That's not really the point. The point is leverage. So with Maven, you have one setting. How do you want to set your min prices? The model is fine-tuned itself to do what it needs to do. We just need to know your min price, because that's kind of important, and that's up to you. Max prices are gone. We have something called auto max, so we'll actually factor in more things. So the world is transitioning to two important things across freaking industries, man: complexity and speed. Can you handle far more complexity faster? Faster basically means within the second. So Maven's designed to handle that level of complexity. It can factor in far more attributes, run its own experiments in a way, and then utilize what it learned in its memory to then tweak itself. And it will intentionally forget, right? Because you know as well as I do, when a seller first comes in stock, they're going to be kind of conservative with their price, but over time, 60, 90 days out, you start to get a little bit more aggressive, right? So your behavior changes. So the model will actually intentionally forget your behavior to have to relearn it to say, great, maybe you're acting different right now. Like, let's think about that. And so instead of having 5 to 7 rule-based strategies, you have one model that you can apply to all your SKUs, and it can self-optimize per SKU and it's self-adapt over time as time changes. It's such a different perspective to take, because even with the game theory stuff, even with all these machine learning AI strategies, why do you still have 15 variations of it? You're still controlling it and having to fine tune it yourself. And I feel like that defeats the purpose. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. And then kind of just another like follow-up question to that. So with like
Sure.
rule-based repricing, one of the concerns, one of the downfalls is if you set it to,
Mhm.
penny drop the buy box or whatever, and you
Mhm.
have a bunch of other people doing the same thing, you're just tanking the listing,
Yeah.
right? So how does
Mhm.
Maven compete against itself if there's another seller that has the same repricer, same model, same setup and everything?
Yep.
How would that work?
So it's not, yeah, it's a great question. So it's not one to one. So if we are both using Maven on the same SKU, I can't guarantee we have the same cost, therefore the same min price. So the range itself could fluctuate dramatically.
Mm,
You might be willing to accept 15%. I'm only willing to accept 30%. Therefore, the behavior itself can fluctuate. It's also not about just you and I, it's about everyone, right? So the model might understand we can actually not compete with each other, meaning we can price match and work together. That's good. Um, but it only takes another seller to jump on that is not acting that way to add some, I'm going to call it chaos to the environment, right? So it's, I love this question because even with rule based, people are like, well, what if everybody on the listing is using Aura? Like, could we do something crazy? No, we can't, because that's when you get into price fixing. Like, that's kind of illegal. And also, I cannot guarantee that every single seller has the same cost, min prices, max prices. I also can't guarantee that you're willing to cooperate, because a lot of people get to, well, could we cooperate and move up? Sometimes, yeah, that is somewhat the goal, but I can't guarantee that everybody's willing to do that. Some sellers are like, I don't care, right? It's kind of like steroids in sports, right? The moment it's legal and everybody's like, oh, we're not going to do that, we're purists. You get one person who's like, I'm going to do that, and they start doing well, everybody's going to have to do it, right? And so the moment you get somebody on a listing who is wanting to compete, and that's not bad, by the way, competition is a good thing. This is capitalism. Um, you're going to have to act differently. So if we're saying, okay, there's a situation where there's only two of us, we're both using Maven, and we happen to have the same cost, same prices, and all that stuff, what would end up happening is we would basically go to the optimal price and we would rotate. Now, that's just us. The market itself will change, right? Because BSR, so demand could increase, in which case the BSR could go down, in which case maybe that optimal price no longer is good. Maybe we need to raise it now because the demand went up, economically speaking. So the optimal price goes up. So now we're going to push to go up higher. So what's nice is like we can cooperate, but the moment you stop cooperating with me, that's a different story. And all it takes is for you to go in and say, you know what, I want to move this faster now. Because here's the thing, that also assumes that we're in the same life cycle of our inventory. It assumes that we're both in, let's say, less than 30 days. So we're both conservative. But you could be in day 60 to 90, and I'm in day 0 to 15. And you're like, I'm way more aggressive than you are. That's fine, right? So for a period of time, we could cooperate. But if you're holding your inventory a little bit longer than I am, you're like, I'll fight you a little bit, right? Like, I want to move it. And so now the game itself changes. So we had to geek out with game theory a little bit there.
What would you say is Maven's like top priority? What is the goal that Maven is trying to accomplish for the user?
Optimal price.
And
So
what does that
every
mean?
AI model, yeah, so every AI model should be fine-tuned for a specific outcome. Otherwise, how do you define success, right? So for us, that fine-tuned outcome is the optimal price. That optimal price is a calculation we run that finds that balance between sales velocity and profitability. It's an actual
Okay.
specific value. I can't give you the breakdown of that. That's a little bit more of like IP that I can't share.
Yep.
So what's nice there is most of the time from what we've seen is the optimal price tends to be slightly above the buy box price. Kind of makes sense. You have competition, therefore the price is going to be compressed down a little bit. So what tends to happen when people go from rule-based to Maven across the board with their entire account, we tend to see a lowering in sales velocity, but an increase in margin. That's more or less what we tend to see. I would say 7 out of 10 times that's what I tend to see. And that's the goal. We're trying to say, how do we move as many units as we can, as profitable as we can? Because those two things are opposing in economics, right? If you got supply and demand, if I increase your price, well, demand should go down, right? So those two things kind of go against each other, but you can find an equilibrium. You can find an equilibrium that's the optimal price. Now, depending on if demand does increase, the optimal price may go up. If the BSR, as an example, as a metric to measure demand, goes up dramatically, the optimal price may go down. So we look at a bunch of different variables to say what should the optimal price be now, and that changes moment by moment in theory, depending on how much fluctuation each listing's having. We recently came out with a third tier called Scale. It's like an enterprise. It's basically for those sellers that are like, they're so large that they have to write their own code because most repricing tools can't handle their account without charging them like ridiculous money. So you basically have to go into a conversation and say, what's this going to cost us to support you technically? What price point makes the most sense? What can you afford? And then we kind of have to create a unique package for them. So we're exploring that. We've done that with a few different agencies where they're like, dude, we got like 50 accounts and like nobody wants to work with us. We're like, great, like we're happy to, like, let's have a discussion. So we can work with like ridiculously large sellers, but that's more of like a one-on-one kind of conversation.
Yeah, I kind of like that. You're doing it more like word of mouth. Like let people talk
Yeah.
good about you guys and be like, come to them. It's like organic sales. That's cool. I like that.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we say. Like we try to be, this is why I try not to be salesy. We try to be education. Like I'm going to explain to you how certain features work, but I'm not going to sell you on it because at the end of the day, you know, it's funny. We have a Discord group and we had somebody with Maven with Pro that was like, all right, you know, that's a big price. Like, how's that better? I'm like, I'm not going to tell you how it's better. Like go use it for free on us. Go through the 14-day trial and you tell me if it actually increased performance. Happy to jump in, help tweak things for you. 3 days later, jumps back into Discord, was like, this is the GOAT, changed nothing. I will pay you whatever you want. I was like, that's the point. The product itself is its own marketing and sales. It should be. If the product is good enough, it should take care of itself.
So viewers, here pretty soon we're gonna transition into a demo, so make sure you stick around. Dillon, I have one more product question, and then I'd love to talk
Yeah.
a little bit more about like the software startup culture. But my final product question is, do either version of Aura avoid the reduced profit ranges?
Yes. So 1.0 is the whole new system. So doesn't matter if you're on Essential or Pro, reduced profit ranges are now factored in. There's things that are you shouldn't have to pay extra for that. Like that should
Yeah.
just be factored in.
Okay.
So yes. Yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome. So when did that feature come out?
So that came out with 1.0. So, you know, there's some
Okay.
major changes like Maven, Hyperdrive, and stuff like that. There's a bunch of small stuff that we changed. You know, we supported small and light finally 1 week before they removed
Yep.
the project. So that's cool.
Great timing.
So we'll have, yeah. So we'll have low price FBA fees supported here in a few weeks. We're going from supporting just North America, 3 marketplaces to all 20 globally. So we got a lot of currency
Awesome.
stuff in there. We have multiple user support now. Trying to add some more integrations as well, and every single page is mobile optimized. So I have a little app right there. You can see a little logo.
Wow.
And so now when you're on the go, you don't have to pull out your laptop in your car. You just pull out your phone, and this is the live demo right here. This is real data. Everything we can do on the computer, we can do on our phone now.
What drove you to want to develop an app version?
User feedback. So everything we did was user feedback driven. So we log everything, we poured through it and said, okay, what really makes the most sense here? We have a lot of people that would say, oh man, I've been using Aura on my phone and it broke the other day. I'm like, it was never designed to work on the phone, period. So like the fact that you got it working, applause to you. But the simple fact is like a lot of people, especially RA people, are just not on a computer all day, but they have tasks they need to get done. So we talk with a ton of our users just to be like, what's important to you? What 3 things do you have to have? How are you doing this? When are you doing this? And we found a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, I do this on my phone. Or, a good example, we had a lot of sellers say, oh, I keep Aura up all day. Because we're like, when do you log in? How many times a week? It's always open. Okay, so now we have a feature called auto refresh. So 4 pages have this, where every 5 seconds Aura is checking for updated information via the API. If we have it and you don't see it, we're going to push it to the page. You don't refresh the page anymore. Real-time data. If it's always up, shouldn't it be up to date? Like, what if you haven't refreshed in 30 minutes? That data's out of date, right? Seconds matter here. So there's that. There's the replay system. So Aura is way more responsive to user changes. So old legacy Aura required organic price changes to reflect changes you made to like your strategy or your listings. Like, let's say you change your min price from 50% ROI to 30% ROI. On average, it could take 15 minutes, could take 2 hours to reflect. Well, now in new Aura, because we re-architected the whole thing, we always have what we call listening memory. We always have the most recent offer change information. So when you change it from 15 to 30%, I don't care if you've got 100,000 SKUs using that strategy. When you click save, those SKUs are updating now, immediately. So everything just faster.
Whenever you first started Aura, what were some ways that you got those initial customers? And then even today, how do you keep those customers or new customers paying on a monthly basis?
Yeah, great question. So traction is difficult. So I realized, their App Eagle had this issue where, they took everybody's price down to a penny. So there's some bad press there. So naturally, when you're
What?
creating oh yeah, you guys might be too young. I'm officially old enough to say that now. I think I spent a third of my life in Amazon, by the way, so that's kind of weird. So App Eagle, they have rebranded, had a technical issue where unfortunately every single listing went to a penny. There's a video of the tech lead talking about that situation and how they had to like try and fix it. It was so bad they had to rebrand. I won't say who they
That's
are now, but they're still
insane.
around. Yeah, and
Wow.
listen, like software is difficult. This is why I keep saying, like, if
Yeah.
you're not technical, like you should really, especially if you're building a repricing tool, you should really think about the risks you're taking.
That's
The
terrifying.
reason why we stopped adding features and fixing bugs in legacy Aura is because we would fix 1 bug and add 2 more. So eventually it gets to a point where like we are risking our users' businesses if we continue to bolt things onto a system that's not designed for scale. So the smart thing to do, although more painful, is to rebuild it from the ground up. So this is not a problem moving forward. Right? You have to make smart, tough decisions. But to get back on point, so we knew that people were not going to trust a new repricing tool. Not going to do it. What they will trust and what they need to trust is the team behind it. So while James was building the beta for that, took 8 to 9-ish months. It was just him, right? I'm non-technical. I built the community, right? We did live sourcing for wholesale. It's what we knew. I basically taught people how to live source wholesale for free in a Facebook group every Tuesday for 2 years. We wrote content. We shared everything that we knew. We educated to get people to understand who we are, that we knew what we were talking about. And we're like, hey, we don't have a course to sell you, but here's what we're working on. And so we developed an audience that were like, this would be fun. Let me jump in and beta test. Awesome. So we got beta testing, right? So now we got some testimonials. We know if it's working or not. And then I realized there's a concept called the Sinatra principle. So if you don't know me, Logan, and I want you to respect me as a simplistic answer, no matter what I do, it doesn't matter. It's gonna be hard. But if Joshua knows you really well and you really respect Joshua, and Joshua says, hey, here's Dillon, he's a good guy, you guys should talk. It's a different concept, right? The reason why when people try to meet each other, they ask for introductions. It's the Sinatra principle. There's a whole story behind why it's called that. So I knew to get initial traction, we needed people who were respected, who people would listen to, that would be willing to say, hey, I'm using them. I like it. You guys should at least go try it. So affiliates was big for us early on. So we basically sat down with people that had audiences, and all I did was say, hey, I'm not asking you to become an affiliate. Here's an account. Here's a discount code for free. Use it for free forever. I want your feedback. I want to know what you actually think. And we happened to build a good product. And so 9 times out of 10, that person would respond after a few weeks, like, hey, let's talk on Zoom. and they'd become an affiliate and start to promote it and all that good stuff. So that's how we initially got traction, right? We got people to believe in us as a team because it is a brand new software. Every software has bugs. I don't care what Apple's got bugs, right? Like everybody's got bugs. So I need you to know that if something does go wrong, the team's got your back because you know who we are. This is why we're so public. This is why I'm so public, right? A lot of tool founders, whatever, are not. It's easy to stay behind your keyboard because you don't have anything to lose. I have my reputation on the line here, right? So I knew I had to do that to get people to say, okay, well, I can trust Dillon. I can trust Dillon enough to go try it. That's all I needed. And then to really start to grow out, it was how do we get people who had different audiences to say, hey, I trust Dillon and I trust the product. I've been using it and I vouch for it. You should also go try it. That really started to snowball. And then obviously we became really heavy on education. So I created the Wholesale Made Easy podcast. We taught wholesale, which it was the first one to actually do that. We went super in deep, super in the weeds on how do you do certain things. It's really evergreen. We still get downloads to this day. And I don't think we've had an episode for 4 years. So we did that. We went on podcasts like this and we just taught, again, I mentioned earlier in the conversation of the company with the most data is the best one to educate and give insights. So that's what we did. I hit up every podcast person like, hey, like, can we just talk? Like, and like, oh, we don't do sales. I'm like, no, I don't do sales either. Like, there's so many myths around repricing and how do you do it? How do you not do it? I was like, we just kind of geek out about this stuff. And so we would just educate, we would teach. And now we've done that. And then we take every single area of the business so seriously, probably to a degree that is not even warranted, but even support. We care so much about that where it's like, no, like there's a standard here. Like this is how we do it. Like, I don't think enough software companies understand how much your brand matters. And that doesn't mean your logo. That's definitely a part of it, but it's what you stand for. It's what you're known for, right? When I can sit here and say we have world-class customer support, I don't have to tell you that. You can go ask other people that and they'll vouch for it. You know what I mean? And so it's reputation, man. It's caring about it, right? And so it's, in the early days, it's putting yourself out there to say, I'm taking on the risk. I got something to lose, but let's get the motions going.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up because that's something that is brought up in one of my favorite books, the 47 Laws of Power. Is one of the laws of power is reputation, right? And so that's one of the main things that you guys started to do. From what you're saying is start the Facebook group, be a authority in the space, and have people trust you based off your reputation. So starting a startup, what have you found that was the hardest thing to do from the idea to actually launching?
It's a good question. The idea is actually not difficult, right? Because everybody thinks, and I used to think this too, like, oh, you got to create the next Facebook, the next brand new thing. No, you don't. Most people don't do that, by the way. Most people take something, they know they can do better, and they go make a better version of that, right? It doesn't have to be, I'm not saying just go make something that's 1% better. Like you should really think it through. But most of the tools, the software, the products you're using are 5 to 10 years old. And they're so ingrained, they can't update themselves fast enough to new technology, to what's possible today. And so a lot of times you can go in and if you care, right. I mean, listen, literally Blockbuster could have bought Netflix, like 30 something million, like nothing. Right. But they were so ingrained where they're like, oh no, like that doesn't make sense. But then Netflix ate their lunch. Now, so going from idea to execution, that's where it gets difficult. And like, we've had a few different ideas we've explored and failed at too. So like you could definitely still fail, right? It's gotta be the right product at the right time with the right market, all that good stuff. But you don't have to, like, everybody wants to go into stealth mode. Everybody's so afraid of like, well, what if somebody catches my idea? It doesn't matter. Does not matter. Most people don't care as much as you do. And so you have to be public, I think, because again, that's where you start to build that audience, that authority, but it's also how you attract users or clients, customers, whatever you want to call them, depending on what you're doing, to try that thing. And by the way, you don't have to make money the first 10 people. What you care about and what is more valuable is feedback. So people jump in there, they give you the feedback, and you say, great. The next 10 people are going to have a dramatically better experience because we're going to take the first 10's feedback and make it better. We're going to iterate. until eventually people are like, hey, like how much are you charging for this? Because I want to pay you. It's a good sign. And then it's really just like momentum and snowballing after that, right? Because if you're customer or user obsessed in the sense of you're actually having discussions with users, but not just giving them what they want, but really thinking about what did they say, maybe then you could have a better solution for how, like there's a lot of people that told us how our listing page should be, but when I dove into what the problem was, that didn't actually solve it. So, that's where you start to have, you got to get into product strategy, get a little bit more critical thinking, I think. And listen, there's a lot of luck, certainly, like no question about it.
Yeah. Dylan, have you read That Will Never Work?
I have not known.
You should check that one out. It's about Netflix.
Okay.
Great
It's
book.
a memoir by Mark Randolph. Fantastic.
Okay. Nice.
Definitely check it out.
Oh yeah, fun fact about the book. Originally their idea was to ship out pet supplies. And then somehow it went into Netflix.
That will never work.
Yeah, but then Chewy came out. But yeah, this kind of goes back to part of like the company culture we're building, which is think of something ridiculous, think of the ideal end state, and then go try and reverse engineer how it could be. It's less about why it couldn't. I mean, listen, you can't be a pessimist and a founder. You have to be somewhat stupidly optimistic because this is not easy. Now, you should still be realistic in the sense of like that could kill us and we should think about that. Yeah, no, of course, right? You need to be strategic, but at the same time, you need to kind of have this level of curiosity and passion to be like, that sounds insane. Let's go figure it out, because you might just do it and realize, wow, I don't even know how we got here, but we did. Well, it's because you did the work,
Was there ever a time like when you were, bootstrapped and getting everything to get launched that you thought in your head that, all right, this isn't going to work? Like what pushed you, what motivated you to go past any of those like roadblocks, mental roadblocks to kind of continue on?
I didn't really care.
If any.
So we've been bootstrapped this whole time.
Answer.
Like we've never raised money. So we're fully
awesome.
bootstrapped, we're profitable. Like the team gets options. It's funny, when we first started to do it, it was just something fun to work on. And then we're like, oh, like it makes money. That's kind of cool. And then we're like, man, it'd be awesome if like this made enough to where like we could just work on it full time because it'd be fun. And then it did. And then it keeps growing. Like, oh man, it'd be cool if we like hire somebody to handle this. Then we did. And they're like, man, I wonder if we could do this, right? Like it's so funny, man. Like this whole thing was not this whole, let's sit down and like, in 5 to 10 years it's going to be this. No, day by day. It was just fun to work on. We enjoyed it and it was working well. And we responded to that. And then eventually, it starts to take off. Now you're going to have real discussions and decisions of like equity. You got to think about like the team dynamics and all these other things. And like now we're at a point where, we kind of have to sit down and say, well, what's our goals for 2024? Because now we're responsible for people's livelihoods. And so now, we got to be way more strategic. But in the early days, we're like, this is just fun. Like this is like, we would just do it anyways. And the fact that it's making money is even cool. There was no expectation of, when we graduate college, this is what we're going to work on full time. That'd be awesome. But there was no expectation of it, at least from my end, like that's what we wanted, but there was no, I don't know. We just kind of went with it. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit more about how you're bootstrapped? Because one, I think that's super cool. Two, I think it's really important to you guys as a company because it's right there on your company page. So, why is that? Why was that a decision that you made? And is that something that you want to stand by long term?
Yeah. Again, it wasn't some like conscious decision where like, should we raise money or not? It's just like, again, the resources that it took to build this was our time. Like James had to code. That took a lot of time. And then like I had to build the audience, growth, marketing, support, all that stuff. So that was my time. That's the thing about software. Like it's not very capital intensive. Like there's a chart of what it takes to start a startup. And like a few years ago it was like 50 grand. Last I looked at it was like 5,000. And I would say it's probably technically zero because really your main cost is what's called hosting, right? Like where you like AWS, where you hosting your code. Most of the time you can get a AWS credit of $100,000. Like there's like, here's a credit for 100 grand. You're like, great. Like until we burn through that, we're good. and like that's consumed. It's not like you have 3 months. It's like, no, you apply it to your account. And if your application costs $5,000 to run a month, you know how long of a runway you have to run it from a cost perspective. And then it's just time if you have at least one person who's technical. Whereas like physical products requires true capital to get up and running. So either you have the capital and you're going to self-fund, or you're going to have to go raise money. And then we just never needed to raise money. I think raising money is awesome, but you have to have a clear reason to do it. If we needed to hire 10 engineers overnight, and engineers tend to cost about 150 grand a year plus benefits, add another 10%, all that good stuff. Yeah, we might need to raise a little bit of money, right? Like if we have to do that, but we don't. But it is important for us because, the moment you bring on outside funding, you dilute the value of your equity a lot the first round. So that's not fun. And then you have a board of directors. Like nobody's going to invest in your company and not sit on the board. They won't say, right? Especially if they're a lead. So if you raise, $500,000, you're not going to get one person on average who's going to give you $500,000. You're going to have like 12 people, but you're going to have one person who's going to give you maybe 150. They give you the most out of everybody individually, and they're going to say, I'm going to sit on the board. Perfect. You got a board seat. So now when we have a discussion of, hey, we need to pivot, the board has to approve it. Certain hires, the board has to approve it. And if you and the board disagree, and the board's like, hey, I want my money out, I want to sell, we should push to sell, now you have conflict. But if you're a bootstrap company and the team's on the same path and same wavelength in terms of what you want to do, you don't have that pressure. Now you can still have internal conflict, right? Like having co-founders is awesome, but also difficult at times. And so like you have to make sure you have clear expectations of each other, whose role does what, all these good things. Like, so that gets kind of difficult, but that's true no matter what. But for me, man, we've had discussions where we've had users try to give us money. Like, hey, can I invest like 100 grand? I'm like, appreciate it. Don't need it. Like, I don't like it because you're just taking on more complexity, right? So like, why? And just because somebody wants to give you money doesn't mean that that's actually going to be a good relationship. That investor could be horrible. You know what I mean? They could be like, oh, I want cash flow. We're like, well, that's not what we're doing here. Well, I want dividends. Well, we're building to exit. So no. Yeah, like you right, it gets really convoluted. And it's nice, like as we're hiring people, we hire kind of out of the tech startup world most of the time. People are like, oh, like how much funding do you have? How much runway do you have? Like infinite. We're profitable. They're like, oh, okay. Like
Nice
I have
change.
yeah. Well, it's funny. I have my ex roommate. He's like global sales at a startup, and he's been there for a number of years. They're valued at like probably a few $100 million. And he's like, you guys are more profitable than we are. It's nuts. Like that's right. Just because like they're just burning cash. Like that's the startup thing, right? Like burn the cash, exponential growth, go ham. For us, we've had pretty good linear growth. Like our growth has been really good. But now again, going back to my comment about like crazy things like goal settings, like how do we do exponential growth? But what's nice is like we don't have this board that's like, you guys have to grow like 100% every single month, or like we're pulling funding. No, we get to say, how the heck do you grow exponentially, especially as a bootstrap company? Let's go figure that out. So it's more fun.
So okay, so one thing I wanted to bring back, and this is a question that I had earlier, but just like you said with the learning disabilities, you have a sometimes a short memory. So I forgot this question, so let's circle back to it. So do you think that having those learning disabilities helped you in the long run? The only reason why I ask is because I was the same way, right? I have ADHD, I had short-term memory. Like I'll remember something that I did when I was 5 or 6, but for whatever reason, I can't remember what I ate for breakfast.
Yeah.
Right. But what
Yeah.
I've found, at least within me, I've been able to be more resourceful with how I use my mind and how I trigger my mind to stay on task and do different things.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's the same for you? And how has that helped you?
Yeah. So initially it held me back because I was a young enough person having authority figures like teachers be like, oh, you're not going to graduate with like a regular diploma, even though that was completely false. Like I did. And it was like, oh, you might not go to college. And so I believe that. And so it made me less interested academically. And I think I could have gone to a better school if I had been supported enough and told that was even an option for me. But I really think it benefited me because eventually I got a chip on my shoulder. So there's one teacher where she told me basically I was never going to amount to anything. And so I had read enough books where I started to have confidence in myself where I had this go-to thing, and I won't say it because I don't know if we can curse on here, but
Do
my
whatever you
go-to
want.
thing was "fuck you, watch me," because I got
Love it.
just sick of people telling me what I was capable of doing without even me having to say it in the conversation. And how did that person even know what I was capable of? They didn't look at my brain scans or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like, so it was frustrating. But what's awesome is like it got me so fired up and gave me a positive chip on my shoulder where I said, okay, the actual problem is I don't know how to learn, so I'll go learn it. I hated to read, now I love to read. Right? Like it made me so interested in understanding actually how I work to go figure it out. And it kind of took shame out of it too. Like there's a little bit of shame, right? When you're a kid and they're like, oh, like you got these issues. You're like, oh, okay. But as an adult, like honestly, like there's so many things like this whole like neurodivergent movement. People are like, actually, it's kind of superpower in its own way. It's just it's not a deficit, it's a difference. And so by understanding what works and what doesn't work for me, it allows me to have more control. There's things that I just suck with. Like my short-term memory is like not great. So I take notes. I write everything down. I externalize as much as possible. I think if I had not gone through that, I probably would not have had enough reason to be obsessive as much as I am. Sometimes it's probably too much obsessive. But like I need to know everything. But what's nice is like I've learned how to do that, right? Like as a founder, I've never done everything I do now. Like at one point I had to be like, I've never recruited or hired somebody. How the heck do we do it? And the first time I did it was not nearly sophisticated as how I'm doing it next week. Um, but it showed me one that I can learn anything because now I know how to learn. No, I just it's weird that there's no classes like here's how to learn. There's like, oh, you just do it. And I'm like, oh wow, thanks. Like, like I got into, reading Moonwalking with Einstein because memory was a big thing, right? So in college I utilized memory palaces. So I could walk into an exam like business law. Everybody's like, trying to like hard wrote memorize this stuff. I'm like, no, I'm just gonna walk through my palace and like would walk in 30 minutes later, walk out and get 100%. And I remember laughing in exams, like, this is literally cheating, in my opinion, because like I just had it visually down perfectly. That has forced me to figure things out, like you were saying, be resourceful. But now that I've done it long enough, I kind of know what works and what doesn't work. That's not to say it's perfect. I mean, listen, having like ADHD, ADD, there are days where it's just really hard to focus. But then you get interested. You're like, all right, so let's go look into biohacking, right? Let's go look at peptides. Let's go look at racetams. Let's go look at being keto. Like I measure my blood glucose now, so I have a levels health CGM attached. Like you get curious, and so you start to
Yeah.
like I'm kind of obsessed with like peak performance. Not that I have peak performance, but I'm obsessed with figuring it out for me. And I would argue that I probably perform 10 times better because of all that stuff than if I hadn't gone through all that stuff and become so interested in it.
So you do implement the 10x principle.
Fair enough.
Got him. No, but that's so interesting that you say all that because I know Simon Sinek has a story about something similar where there was a student who took his SATs thinking he's going to completely bomb it because he was always like a C average student, and then next thing you know, he got one of the highest scores in his high school in his class, right? And then at the end of it, it was a mistake. Like he got the wrong score, but for like 2-3 years, he thought those were his scores. So he's like, oh, you know what? I am going to apply myself. I'm going to figure out how I learned something, and then went on to college and ended up becoming a doctor. Right. So I think that's the best thing that they don't teach you how to learn. Right. Because I'm the exact same way. High school, I hated reading. Now, me and Logan share different books that we're reading on a weekly basis. Right.
Nice.
And
I
it's
love
just
that. Yeah.
implementing them in different ways. So that's amazing. And on that subject, do you ever plan to write a book? Because throughout this almost hour and a half conversation, you have so much insight in so many different things. It'd be awesome to see what would come out of your mind if you sat down and just wrote on a
Yeah.
whole
No, I
long book.
appreciate it. I think I still have a lot to figure out, so I don't think I'm quite there on the business side, but I have laid out. So I started writing a non-fiction or a fiction book actually. And then I got like a few chapters and I just lost interest, but I was like, where the heck do I even take this? So I did have a book idea, basically looking at lifestyle hacking. So this kind of goes back to the whole being resourceful thing. Um, I have a slight obsession with James Bond, and I was like, oh, he likes nice watches. So I started, Googling, all right, how do you wear luxury watches for not luxury watch prices? Because I couldn't afford it back then. And turns out there's a way to do that. Same thing with travel. I was like, I really want to travel, but I didn't have a lot of money. So I got into travel hacking. I actually wrote for a blog called 10X Travel more than a decade
10X
ago. I
again,
used to write
man.
for them.
Man, there we
Dude,
go.
I know. Now I'm starting to regret my comment,
he,
man.
he
There's a
loves
theme.
Grant. He lied.
Can we go back
Can't
to the
stand that
part
guy. Oh my
where
god.
you said you're ADD and you wrote 2 chapters of a book and then put it down? That's the most ADD thing I've ever heard. That made me
I
laugh.
know. And of course, like I went ham for like 8 hours, like nobody exists, and then just like I don't know. I know. Um, so I had this concept, right, where I think there is a veil of knowledge of how certain things are expected to work and how they actually work. Luxury watches is one, exotic cars is another, um, travel is one, right? Like my wife and I recently went on our honeymoon, and that probably would have cost us 10 grand, and I think I spent 1,500 on it. And like we flew like business class in like 5-star hotels, like everything. I've wore in 1 year, actually my senior year of college, I wore 80 grand worth of luxury watches and made 5 to 10 grand on that. So I didn't pay for it, which was nice. Like I made money on it. Haven't done the luxury or exotic car thing. That's just, there's like way more complexity to it, but I know a bunch of guys who do that. But even like planes, like there's ways to hack planes. There's ways to, um, with the whole like Ukraine stuff, I got kind of interested in private military companies, so PMCs. Turns out you can actually hire them for not a stupid amount of money. Like you can hire a
Wow.
PMC group for 50 grand as security, and you could get like ex Mossad, like ex Navy SEAL guys. Like just crazy things where people assume
Yeah.
it requires so much resources, or like that's never possible. I'm like, but why not? Like maybe it is. I don't know, but let's go figure it out. Like, why can't you have 3 passports? Right? Like
Yeah.
there's a guy who teaches that. And so I have this fundamental belief that there was, no matter what that thing is, there was at least one person on the internet who has obsessed about that for the last half to a full decade and just is dying to tell you about it. And every single time I have found that person. And so I
You
wanted
definitely
to write a
have
book that
ADHD.
basically explored that. Oh God, yeah, dude. I mean, dude, we could talk at length about the most random stuff. But it's like, how's the day? I'm like, oh my God, I'm bored. But so I wanted to write this book basically, which with each chapter exploring these different things. And I basically wanted to help people kind of shift their perspective of how to take these seemingly impossible, intangible, inaccessible things and show like actually they're not that inaccessible. Like, yeah, they're still expensive, but you can get a private plane for 15, 20 grand a year.
I
It's
know
not a
your book
jet,
is let's go figure it out for sure.
but yeah, yeah.
No, it should be fuck you, I can.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that. Yeah, full circle. That's good.
But no, that's awesome. I mean, that definitely shows you really you're part of the club of the ADHD crew, just because of
Yeah,
how many rabbit holes you go down. I'm the
dude.
exact same way. But you know what? Like people say so many bad things about it, but for me, it's been such once you figure out what it is and how to focus it, I can
Mhm.
literally sit at my computer desk like tunnel visioned out in sourcing or doing another side project, and just as long as nobody
Mhm.
bothers me, I'm in the
Yeah.
zone for 4 or 5 hours. It used to be bad because it used to be Call of Duty. See, but now I have a wife
Oh yeah,
and,
I've been
I have
there.
a daughter, and so now
Yep.
it's making Amazon work and this podcast. So
Yep.
it's definitely its own superpower.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's nice though because eventually you have such a breadth of knowledge and so many random things that you start to connect the dots. So like the thing that helped me with wholesale is I had to go deep into sales because I was a personal trainer, and that's not really my forte. Like I'm personable, but I'm not outgoing. I'm not very extroverted. So sales is difficult for me. But once I realized, oh, wholesale is not different in terms of sourcing, really. The skill is sales. So if you go study, go in depth on sales, that's when I was like, oh, you know what I'm doing? Like I'm having a conversation, I'm cold calling a brand, and they're telling me no for these reasons. Those are objections. So now I can write a script to handle these objections and I can test it. And eventually I was like, cool, here's the 4 objections you're going to get. That's the only ones I've seen. And here's how to answer them in a way that puts it back on them and makes it difficult for them to say no. And so like, I could basically turn this whole, like, I need to have a conversation into, oh, well, if I do this, that person's more receptive to me. Like somebody would get on and be like, what? All right, well, if they don't know me and they're already in a bad mood, that's not going to work. So I have to get them to change their state. So I would fake fall down a flight of stairs and spill coffee and be like, ah, shit, man, so sorry, dude. But I would start dying laughing because all of a sudden I gave them permission to take a break. And now I'm like, you can laugh at me. And like, you good? I was like, yeah, dude, shit, I'm sorry. I was like walking down the stairs, like completely bust my ass. So sorry. But now all of a sudden we're together. You know what I mean? And so I knew, okay, stage 1, I got to get you to like me as a person, because now you're not denying this random dude who called you. You're denying Dillon, who you kind of built a little bit of a relationship with real quick. And even the way I positioned myself in the company and all these things, I never said me or I said we. You know, we're a company that does X. It's just me. But a company is an identity. So technically there's 2 of us, right? Like,
Yeah.
having a little bit of exposure and going deep on understanding sales helped me in wholesale and understand it. And like all these different things, you start to notice patterns. Like you can go into pretty much anything now and just be like, oh, it's probably kind of like this, and like kind of get running pretty fast. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into the demo of GoAura, we do have a segment that we do here at the podcast, which is it's called the Spitfire Random Questions that we're going to ask our guest, and they are just random questions. Some of them are fun, some of them we're just trolling, but overall, you only have a second to answer. Okay,
Okay.
so get ready.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. So, are you a believer of competition is the thief of joy, or you should find a worthy rival?
Worthy rival.
Apple TV or Roku?
Apple TV all day.
YouTube videos or podcasts?
YouTube videos. I'm visual.
Heads or tails?
Heads.
Favorite number?
7.
Your favorite repricer?
Aura, obviously.
And
what if I said something
Focus
completely
or
different?
On cloud? we would know you're the 10x is there. It's real.
Oh
man, but those were our 10 Spitfire questions. I guess not 10, but yeah, those are our Spitfire questions. We try to have a little fun.
Love it.
So yeah, I think it's time for a demo. If we could, kind of hit
Awesome.
high level, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, just show everyone what Aura is all about.
Sure. Yeah, so let's jump in here. Okay, so this is the updated version. This is 1.0. So 1.0 is really just us rebuilding Aura from the ground up. So it's not an upgrade, it's just a whole new platform. There's a lot of changes there. So we obviously don't have time to go through everything. But first and foremost, being very intentional about design, the interface, like we've talked about in this conversation, we use color very intentionally, right? We like this kind of minimal perspective, right? You mentioned like Apple, like that's kind of the vibe we like, but we're using color intentionally here. So a good example is in old Aura, there's a section up here called listing alerts. There's 2 problems with that. One, if they're all zeroed out, it would stay there. So now we're just wasting space. And number 2, if there's always values there, behaviorally speaking, you just gloss over it, right? So it didn't really serve its purpose. So now we move those. So we have this bouncing red or this yellow dot. What's important for this is if we have a red alert, that's something you need to fix because it's broken, we'll show you a red dot. But if you don't have one, we'll show you a yellow. And if you don't have any, we won't show you anything. So we're making things just more visual in terms of like, where does your eye need to go, right? I want to go to my sales. That makes sense. We got the color here, but also like we don't use red anywhere here unless you're losing money. That's a different red. So if we actually have an error or something you need to do, it's very easy to see that. There's also no more coming soon badges, which is awesome. So buy box ownership percentage is here. So we show that at the marketplace level as well as each individual listing page, which is super important. And now you have units sold as well. So I mentioned that this page has auto refresh. I have it toggled off right now. And so what's nice is every 5 seconds, as data is flowing through, this is just going to update in real time, right? This is like an actual dashboard, which is awesome. So that's super important. We're doing a lot of interesting things here, though. Like we're trying to be more keyboard led. So you notice there's a / up here. So if I hit / anywhere, I can jump straight there and start searching for whatever I want. So that's super, super important. So it's nice here, and sorry, I had a pop up for storing my credentials. So I could be anywhere and then just hit / and I'm jumping around doing whatever I need to get done, right? Super important. Everything is just faster. That's what's nice. Like repricing, like in terms of like us reflecting changes that you've made, that's happening super fast. Page loads is super fast, right? I can jump around as fast as I need to. And we're also adding in like product images. 7 years ago, it didn't make sense to do that because Amazon was not as strict about the featured image as they are now. Now we can do that and it doesn't look horrible. So that's exciting. So actually, if we look at listings here, you can see it's easier for us to just see, okay, what are these, right? These are active listings. What's cool is we're doing 3 important things on this page, and I want to highlight this because there's a lot of quality of life stuff here. So the first one is now you can actually go in and decide what columns you want to see and which ones you want to hide. Some things you care about, some things you don't. And this is per user, by the way. We have multiple users, so if you have a VA in here or a friend, they can do a bunch of wacky stuff and not override your configurations. We'll eventually add this so that you can also decide in what order you see this information. Right, you really need to specify it to you as the seller because you care about unique things compared to somebody else. We do have age of inventory, which is awesome, so that's in there now. And then filters, right? There's a lot of cases where, yeah, you want to look for one specific SKU or listing, but a lot of times you're looking for a group, like, right, like what scenario are certain listings finding themselves in? So now you can add these filters and you can actually stack these, right? So I can say, show me everything using Maven, and where I have hyperdrive enabled, and I can just go straight there, which is nice. Eventually we'll make this so you can actually save these as a pre-configured group and then name them. So you can say, this is my, I don't know, hyperdrive on Monday view, whatever makes sense. So you have those now, so you can find very granular specific things. You can add these and stack them as much as you need to. And then the thing that I think actually will have the most quality of life benefit is this small search up here. So yeah, sometimes you need to see scenarios, you need to go to a specific SKU, or you actually just need to look for all your Yeti stuff, right? So this is called a keyword search. So I can type in Yeti and I can see my Yeti stuff. What's cool about this though, and this was not true in Legacy Aura, we're searching the product name, the SKU, and the ASIN. So you notice we encode some stuff in here, right? So I can do, let's do Walmart. There we go. Now we got that, right? So now I can really, depending on how I do my SKUs, I can search for specific things. If I encode things like who sourced it, like one of my VAs sourced it, great. I can search whatever I use to signal that that person is the sourcer. And then I just pull those exact things. And then as an example here, if I do Yeti, I can now take bulk actions against these. So I can say, show me all my Nike stuff, and maybe I want to change my strategy. Great, I can do that in bulk, which is super nice. This page auto refreshes as well, so the data is as up to date as possible. If we sit here long enough, we'll actually see all the prices updating and flashing in real time, going in and out of the buy box, which is like super sick. So that's super fun. And then if we take a look at the specific SKU page, because this is where we get into a lot of changes, this page took like two to 3 weeks to design. And every page is designed for mobile first, right? I mentioned that, but it's also designed to scale. So everything here we can add to, which is pretty nice. Also auto refreshing, but here's a feature that I didn't think was going to be as important, but a lot of people really loved. It's the all offers. So if we click here, this is all the offers on that particular SKU. Now, what's nice is I can click on one of these seller IDs and go straight to that seller storefront. So a lot of sellers are using this for reverse sourcing, funny enough, so storefront stalking. You can go straight there. So that's pretty nice. Now, I mentioned earlier the way this page was designed earlier in our conversation. It's designed for flow, right? So this is that above the fold. I haven't scrolled yet. I clearly can get a grasp as to what are my settings, what's true right now, how are my sales doing, right? Okay, I'm matching the buy box. It's rotated out right now. I'm using Maven, and sales are kind of light right now. Okay, maybe I want to go deeper into that. So I can scroll down and go deeper. I mentioned these layers of information. So that first one is this all offers that I showed you guys. But then on hover, super important, right? Like there's a big difference between setting your minimum ROI to 15%, and then a lot of people set their max as like 100, 150%. That's a big range. So a lot of sellers are like, yeah, that's great. I know that, but like, where am I at now? So now when you hover, we'll show you the current profit, the current margin, and the current ROI. So there is no more questions. And what's nice, not a great example here, but on quantity, we will break this down as granular as we need to. So we onboarded a user who had 304 units and 13 different inventory statuses. So this expanded out to 13, and we showed every single unit in every single status. So now you don't have to jump to Seller Central, to Amazon.com to get more information. We just poured it in here for you, which is super important. And then performance. This is such a new section here, right? This is like that last layer of information. We're trying to see within a period of time, we're looking at 30 days here, what is happening, right? What's the trends in my price? So a good example here, this is your price over a period of time. So we had sellers say, yeah, I'm making strategy changes and I think it's going well, but I don't know what's really happening. Now you can visually see that, right? I can see, okay, how are my price updates going? Is that going up or down? How are my units sold? What's my buy box percentage? I can get a good grasp as to what is happening and then take action, right? The whole point is you're coming here to analyze information, to answer a question, to make a decision, and then take action. So you'll notice this settings section, by the way, is scrolling with us. It's important because if you make a decision down here, I don't want you to have to scroll up to then make changes. No, just go to your right and make it. So we can clearly see, okay, my price is actually going up and down. There's a lot of interesting things happening here with Maven. It's trying to push that price up and protect it. And that might worry me because we don't have a whole lot of units being sold here, but actually the buy box is not bad, right? I'm still getting almost 24% buy box ownership percentage in this period of time. It looks like it is fluctuating a little bit. So there's a few days where we get 0. So I might want to look into all offers and actually see, maybe there's a competitor doing something interesting. Maybe I want to give more or less range for Maven to play inside of. Really just depends. And then of course, if I want to make that change, I can come in here, change my strategy, what have you. So this page is really designed for you to come here, see what's true, make a decision, take action, and then move on with your life, right? You're doing that with, in a lot of cases, dozens, if not hundreds of SKUs per day. So if we can compress that time, help you make better decisions and reduce the amount of time it takes you to do that whole cycle, that's just better for you, right? So that's what's nice. And then, we briefly talked about Maven earlier in terms of how that's designed. So I won't dive super into that. That's less of a visual thing anyways, but hyperdrive is something I do want to touch base on here. So this is actual feature, which is pretty cool. So we found that when people say instant repricing, that really means 1.5 to 2 minutes round trip from when we submit the price change, which is instantly, to when Amazon confirms and accepts it. That's 1.5 to 2 minutes on average. So we found that for 50 SKUs, we can actually do that within 10 seconds. So this is a massive boost in terms of speed. So theoretically, we can reprice this same SKU 12 times within the same time it takes your competition to do it once, which is pretty interesting. So that's pretty cool. That's awesome. And yeah, so I don't want to belabor too much because I know we don't have a lot of time, but at a high level.
That's awesome. Does anyone else in this space, any other repricer, offer hyperdrive? Or is that?
No. So hyperdrive is hard to implement. So it's only possible using the new SP API. We're using part of the API in a very unique way. You would have to re-architect your entire backend to do it from our perspective. And we were already doing that anyways. Yeah. So we just paused like, we could do this, Yeah, great timing, right? So that's a huge, huge feature. And Maven utilizes hyperdrive in a strategic way, not on every single SKU, but when it makes sense, it will strategically utilize that as well.
So the 50 listings, is that I can only have that toggle on for 50, or Maven will only choose to use it to 50 at a time?
So
like
Maven,
I could have
that's
100
a different
selected.
Yeah, so that's a different story. You can only apply hyperdrive to 50 SKUs at any one time.
Okay.
So there's a technical limitation. If we do 50 SKUs, that gives us to 10 seconds. If we go to 100 SKUs, it doesn't take us to 20 seconds. It actually takes us like a minute-ish. So there's an exponential back off. So 50 is that sweet spot between giving you the most amount of SKUs relative to the speed performance increase you get.
Okay. That's incredible.
Yeah. It's pretty sick. It's pretty sick.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dillon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Viewers, thank you for listening. If you want to check out GoAura, we will put a link down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one. Peace.
Thanks, guys.